With everything that can go wrong in communication, it's amazing that we can communicate in the first place. How to communicate with your spouse. Let's learn about that today. Communication, probably one of the first things that comes up when I meet with a couple. You know what? It's amazing that we can communicate in the first place. Here's the model, just to give you a little appreciation of this. Every communication has a sender and a receiver of any particular message. So the message goes from the sender to the receiver. Now let's say that the sender has message A in mind, whatever A represents. The sender wants to send this message A over to the receiver. Well, in order to do that, the sender has to do a process first called encoding. Encoding is where we take that message and we translate it into some code. This message, as I'm sharing this thought with you today on our YouTube channel, had to be encoded digitally. The digital encoding, you don't understand the code, but that's the code that is understood by the computers. So we put it into that kind of a code and then we send it on over to the receiver. Well, the receiver obviously has to do the decoding. So if you received this video in the digital code that the computer understands, you wouldn't understand it unless you're a programmer. The encoding has to be decoded on this side, and that's why you have a computer or a smartphone that understands the code that was sent and it decodes it so that you get the message on this side. Now, usually in a couple, in a relationship, any interaction between two human beings, the code that is chosen is typically a language. So we're speaking English here today. That's a code. Spanish is a code. Finnish is a code. Swahili is a code. Those are the codes we typically use as human beings, but there's more. The code might include body language, facial expressions, right? That sends a different message. This is all part of how we encode. All the nonverbals, the body language, the context, the tone of voice, it all becomes part of the code. Now, here's where we run into some interesting challenges. Before that signal can even get over to the decoder on the receiving side, it has to go through this big cloud of noise. It might be physical noise, like a radio blaring or a jackhammer outside of your window, or a busy freeway, or a plane flying overhead. That's all physical noise that can interfere with the code getting across. We were having a meeting yesterday with our National Speakers Association in a smoothie bar. Well, they have these really loud blenders, and so we had to pause every so often for the noise to die down before we could continue with our communication. Now, noise doesn't have to be physical noise. Sometimes it's just thought noise. Have you ever been talking to someone and the lights are on but nobody's home? It's like they're staring at your forehead or something, you know, and you can tell they're really not connected with you because they've got some noise in their head that's totally distracting them. History, gender, upbringing, language, culture, all of these things create additional noise. So between the encoding problems, the decoding problems, all of the noise that it has to go through in the meantime, usually what happens is the receiver picks up a whole different message from what was intended by the sender. Now, you know this has happened to you. How many times have you heard back from your spouse, for example, oh, so you're saying I'm just a whatever, right? And you're like, no, that's totally not what I was saying. Well, why did they pick that up? It may have been an encoding problem, it may have been a decoding problem, it may have been the noise in between, but a lot of times A doesn't come across as A, it turns into B. So I share the whole model with you because it's amazing that we can communicate at all given everything that could go wrong here. There's 2 steps that I think will help us to improve our communication so that A equals A. That's what we're going for. We want to make sure that what's sent is exactly the same thing that is received. And for this, I'm going back to 2 steps that were shared by Stephen R. Covey, an amazing leadership expert. You've probably read his books or at least heard of him. Covey taught that we first listen to understand. Now, there's 2 important words here that we need to pay attention to. Listen and understand. Listen has exactly the same letters as the word silent. Yeah, you're checking that out right now, aren't you? Yeah, it does. That's probably a coincidence, but it's also kind of helpful because we need to quiet some of the noise and just zip it for a minute while you listen. You got 2 ears and 1 mouth. Use them in that proportion, and I think we're going to be good. Listen. Now, what's our goal? To understand. Some people think that understanding means agreeing. Understanding does not equal agreeing. So don't worry about agreement right now. You simply want to make sure that A equals A. That's what we're going for. Then we have understanding. So while you're listening, pay attention. Quiet some of the noise in your own mind. Some people are quiet while they're listening, but they're trying to dream up all of their answers to what they're hearing. You know what I'm talking about? Coming up with your rebuttal. No. Listen to understand. You make sure that you get it. And I don't care if you agree at this point. In my experience, most couples don't disagree as much as they think they do. They haven't taken the time to really understand each other. So this is huge. Now the second step, express. This happens when you are the sender, okay? When you're on this end of the model. Express to be understood. Notice that the goal is exactly the same. It's understanding. So we're not expressing to persuade or to convince or to manipulate or to drag someone into our point of view. We are expressing to be understood. That means you're going to pay attention to your language, to your tone of voice. You're going to encode this message in the way that is the most likely to be accurately received. Because our goal is still the same. We want A to equal A so that there is an understanding. The sender and the receiver have the same message in their mind. So that's just 2 steps that we can use that will make a huge difference. And then as you practice this, you get better at actually communicating. It always gets me excited to know that you are working on your key relationships, and I am so honored to be a part of that. Thanks for being here.